mobiles may interfere with the recording system. Also remind members to declare any business, financial or otherwise, as we move through today's business, and also ensure that your devices are switched to silent, and the easiest way to do that is function and F8. We received an apology from Chris Hazard, and I know that Mr. Kinahan and Mr. McCausland are going to be late. So that's the state of play in regards to members. Moving then to Chair's business, the DE 2015-16 draft budget has been published, and the department is to brief the committee next week. You will find the consultation paper on your desks just under tabled items. My understanding is that I actually haven't had a chance to read this yet, but I see that there is a reduction in the aggregated schools budget, so that will be something of concern that we need to look at. Moving then to the Marshall report. The committee wrote last week to the department regarding commitments in respect of preventative education in schools flowing from the Marshall report on child sexual exploitation. The clerk has circulated the link to the Eddy review, which formed part of the Marshall report, and that has specific interest then to this committee. At the meeting on the 10th of December, we will be getting a briefing in relation to matters, and that might be something that we want to look at that committee and perhaps explore it at further meetings. I met yesterday with representatives from the Brookborough Shared Education Campus. There are two primary schools, Brookborough Controlled Primary and St Mary's Primary School, and they have a proposal for a shared campus moving forward, but they do incredibly good work. And we've already heard, obviously, of the work of Ballycastle and Cross and Passion, although that's in the second post-primary. But if members are agreed, that perhaps we ask them to come up to present to us, just to talk about the work on which they're doing, because they do have a project which is being supported by CCMS and by the Education Library Board. So it might be useful just to hear what they have to say, if members are content that we include that into a future briefing. Great.
Good.
Thank you. I also, it was tabled last week's, it's been on our agenda on a number of occasions with regards to Seago Primary, and again I met with them last week, and getting sort of committee guidance and just I suppose support that perhaps we write to the department. This is in relation to temporary variations, and perhaps ask them to look at a review of the assumptions of the catchment of sectoral schools, particularly around the needs model, that they are not controlled schools. There are 4 schools which fall outside sort of the natural. They're called maintained. They are maintained schools, but they're being classed as controlled. So it might be useful just to have the department to look at them, particularly given that Seago have asked for a temporary variation. The consultation has closed. There was a further consultation with regards to their temporary variation, and the department are to come back and determine whether or not that will be allowed. But it might be useful that just on the broader scheme of things for them to look specifically at the differences for that school. So if you're content, we do that. We also had a conversation last week around Christmas cards and the cost associated with sending them, and the clerk has advised that there will be no charge to the taxpayer for sending out hard copy cards, as these costs are covered by the sale of cards in the assembly shop. So essentially, if we purchase cards, then we actually contribute to the assistance of costs associated to the various committees sending out the cards. Isn't that right?
Yes, Chair.
So that's our charity contribution. If we actually go in and buy our own if we go in and buy cards, then we're paying for them. So are you content that we send out hard copy cards, given that there's no cost to the committee?
How many cards in question?
Many, probably about, we usually send, Chair, about 80 or so to the various witnesses and other organisations that come up and give us evidence and things.
Okay, content we do that. Thank you very much. Oh, and I have one other. I met with the Royal Society of Chemistry, and again, this is a theme which the committee has looked at and continues to look at regards specialist primary science teaching in Northern Ireland. So if I know that they met with a number of members this week, so if you're content that we forward the paper which they gave to us and the various recommendations for the department to look at and to comment on the recommendations, and perhaps ask if they would contact the Royal Society of Chemistry directly as well and have that conversation, because I don't believe they have spoken to them, so it would be useful for that meeting to take place between that group and the department. So if you're content, we do that as well. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I apologise. I have to go at 11. But secondly, I wonder, Chair, you'd be aware that there was a media interest in the situation around Strandtown Primary School and the potential of it not servicing its feeder schools in the way that it has in the past. I wonder maybe we could get some information on that, Chair. I mean, maybe you would like to take that up as Chair of the Committee.
Very kind of you. I think, yeah, if we can, maybe we should write to...
It's the Belfast Board.
It's the Belfast Board, and I believe the Minister has become involved in this as well. The Minister has visited the school.
In the last 2 days?
Well, no, I understand that he has in the past visited the school, and the Minister's aware of the situation, isn't he?
Is he? Right, okay.
If we write to the Board.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chair, I know we don't normally get involved in individual schools. I have no problem with this really, but as far as I can understand, the potential problem is down to perhaps a oversubscription of about 9 pupils. You know, it should be fairly easily dealt with, I would have thought. That may be a sign of what's to come. They should know how many. I mean, they're all coming from 3 primary schools. They know exactly how many are going to transfer it into P4. So I mean, it's got an awful lot of coverage, but it doesn't sound that drastic, really. You know, it's not the normal problem where you've much bigger numbers at that perhaps P1 or nursery. You know.
Okay, so you believe it's only around 9 pupils?
Right.
You believe it to be only around 9 pupils?
Well, I heard 14 yesterday, and then I heard it reduced to 9. But that's on the assumption that every single pupil that's
Wishes
in
to
P3 at Greenwood and the other 2 schools is going to transfer automatically. So, you know, in a school of 850 and probably rising, you know, it doesn't really sound insoluble.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't disagree with Trevor. I think we just need clarity on the situation. But I think, Chair, that if it is the potential this year, and I don't know what the demographics are, but it may well become an even more greater problem next year.
Okay. Well, it's useful just to investigate that, given
Yeah,
the fact
I think
that it has
so.
been given quite a substantial amount of airtime. Okay, thank you. Moving then to draft minutes of the meeting of the 19th of November. Are members content that they're an accurate reflection of last week's meeting? Great. Okay. Matters rising. Just note correspondence from the Employment and Learning Committee at page 15. Just refer you to the Sky Pro Drive Pro link, which includes further submissions to the Shared and Integrated Education Inquiry. And if you're content that we can publish this information on our webpage. The Assembly research paper. If you're content that we note a short paper from Assembly Research, it's page 16 on science teaching hours for initial teacher education providers, and obviously that ties in with the discussions that a number of us had then with the Royal Society of Chemistry. So if you're content that we could perhaps include that research paper. Do we need to do that? Department?
I can do it. We'll publish it anyway, but yeah, no problem. We'll do it,
Okay.
yeah.
It might be useful to forward that to the organisation that we met with.
We could do. Yeah. And we could, and just to let them know that we have made contact with the department as well. Okay, moving then to our first briefing for our inquiry into Shared and Integrated Education Dissolving Boundaries programme. Just refer you to the clerk's cover note at page 19 and refer you to relevant papers, including briefing papers from Professor Austin and a copy of the 2010-11 ETIDES Inspectorate Joint Evaluation of the Dissolving Boundaries programme. And just for you to note that the session will be recorded by Hansard.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I welcome you to the committee this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. Professor Austin, would you mind introducing your colleagues and then making an opening statement, and members will follow up with some questions.
Well, colleagues, good morning, and thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you about the research that we've been doing. I thought it was important to bring with me two colleagues, two teachers who've been involved in our work, so that you can hear from the chalk face exactly how this works. I think you all have a copy of this document, the summary. It seemed to us that the work which we'd been doing in the Dissolving Boundaries programme, which has been running for 15 years and is a North-South programme, offered us some very interesting data about the way that you can use technology to link schools together, combined with a face-to-face contact. And that this experience, this evidence, might be particularly interesting for your committee in the context of thinking about ways that you can develop shared education so that it reaches potentially every child, even those in the most geographically isolated schools. So I've started this paper by simply noting that there is a challenge that even according to the Department of Education's own figures, around 20% of schools, they tell me, have had no involvement at all in any form of shared education. So the presentation is saying this is one way that we might be able to reach that group, while at the same time offering schools that are already engaged in some face-to-face contact an additional means of strengthening and deepening the partnership. Okay, so when I use the term blended learning, I'm talking about this mixture of long-term online contact over a whole year with face-to-face contact. And I would like to sort of stress that this is not all online. We think there's a real value in using both face-to-face and online connection. Just briefly, 3.1, it's just to say that the Dissolving Boundaries was a very substantial programme. I think we can say that there's a base here, both from special schools, primary schools and post-primary schools, over 15 years with 50,000 young people, 2,500 teachers, 570 schools. In other words, the evidence from this work, I think, is substantial. You may know this, but just for the record, the Dissolving Boundaries programme was funded by the Departments of Education in Belfast and Dublin, but it was managed by Ulster University and our colleagues in Maynooth. When we sat for a moment and said, right, so after 15 years' work and all that investment, what exactly have we learned that might be of value to the system? It seemed to us there were some key lessons. And I'm going to invite Alison and Anton to add their points here. But number 3.2, I want to just stress that whatever recommendations your committee might come up with, I know you'll be very conscious that in the end, if the teachers are not on board, not supportive, it's not going to work. And it's partly for that reason that I'm really very pleased that from their different types of schools, and they'll tell you more about where they're teaching, that teachers are central to the delivery of any of this. And what we found was that there was absolutely no substitute for bringing the teachers from the two schools together and allowing them to spend time learning the technology together and then saying, okay, how are we going to plan a programme of work that's going to engage our respective classes? So, Anton, do you want to add a little to what I've said on that point?
No problem. My name is Anton Moran. I'm presently principal at Ballyhaggett Primary School in Castle Rock. I've been in post for the past 11 months. My current school is presently in shared education partnership with Castle Row Primary School in Coleraine, and we have been sharing education with them since 2009. We were part of the original PI cohort, and we're now funded through Queen's University in Belfast. My previous school was Holy Family Primary School in Maherfelt, and in my role as Year 5 teacher there, I was also Dissolving Boundaries coordinator, and that's where I have linked in with Roger's programme. I took part in the Dissolving Boundaries programme from 2007 to 2014 when it finished, and that was 7 years in total. I also, through completing my master's degree from the University of Ulster in 2010, I produced a research paper entitled Dissolving Boundaries Programme, a Revised Curriculum Perspective. So the key benefits, in my opinion, of the type of blended approach which the Dissolving Boundaries Programme promoted, I would have found a significant enhancement of pupils' ICT skills over and above the pupils who were not involved in the project. Through my research, I surveyed the participating teachers, and I also did 2 case studies. I found that the Dissolving Boundaries programme complemented perfectly the revised curriculum as it was in 2010, especially in a cross-curricular sense. It also gives the opportunity for us as teachers to, for the requirements of CA assessment, the work that we do fits in well with that and allows us to tick that box, so to speak, as regards assessment opportunities within primary education. Dissolving Boundaries also provides a strong purpose and context for the children's learning, and I've found, especially through my work, it is the improved motivation of the pupils, especially boys, and also those pupils who have significant barriers to their learning. The whole use of ICT, specifically in communication. One particular example that I had found was a boy that I taught, an autistic child, who struggled to communicate verbally, but the parents came to me and said he loved video conferencing because he actually spoke into the camera rather than to a person's face. He struggled with that and actually couldn't do that, but he was able to talk into the camera because he didn't feel that pressure to communicate face to face. So those are kind of simple little examples that show the power of technology if it's used correctly in education.
Can I come back to you in a minute? Alison, just on the point of the importance of teachers coming together, and are you an ICT specialist?
No, I am definitely not an ICT specialist. Yeah. And so this pushed my boundaries of ICT. But I was so enthusiastic about the project that it made me want to come to grips with video conferencing, and when the children were moodling each other, which was a bit like emailing, trying to follow their string of thought, they were all happy to go ahead with it, and it was a challenge to me at the start. And then each year, when I became comfortable, another teacher was brought in, and on occasion they would be calling me for advice. How do I set the video conferencing up? But it required a lot of planning at the beginning with the partner teacher, with your twin teacher, to make sure that this was going ahead.
And I think this connects to the next point, which is 3.3. Everything which took place in Dissolving Boundaries was rooted in the curriculum. In other words, we didn't at any time say we expect this to be done as an extracurricular activity after schools or at lunchtime. It should be enriching what you're doing already. And I can say that Obviously, the curriculum in Northern Ireland is not the same as the curriculum on the other side of the border. That presented some challenges for teachers. But thinking about the application of this to shared education, it's obviously going to be a much easier process since we all have the same curriculum. One thing I'd like to stress, if I may, at 3.3, is that after the teachers completed their day's training, they each signed up to a learning agreement. In effect, a form of contract about what they were going to be doing for the whole year. And they kept a copy, and their principal had a copy, and the two universities had a copy. So, in other words, there was a process of ensuring that promises and agreements made at the time were then followed through. And the other thing I'd just say about 3.3 is to stress the huge variety of projects that schools actually did, all the way from enterprise. We had 2 schools running mini companies together across the border. We had lots of projects to do with science, children carrying out experiments in 2 schools. We had projects in history, geography, English, and the enterprise work, of course, connected very well into numeracy. So, in other words, this is not confined just to citizenship. That's the point I want to make. It's not one element of the curriculum. It's potentially any part of the curriculum that the teachers agree they can work on that forms the core of the work that's done. Do you want to add anything to that point?
I would emphasise the point that Roger made as regards good planning at the start. I have both sides of the perspective, as in the dissolving boundaries and the shared education, and through both there's a very similar approach from my 2 experiences, and the key, in my opinion, the first critical step in education is good planning at the start with your partner school or partner teacher. And even for that, in my new school, I'm using the experiences that I've developed and found in Dissolving Boundaries to take my new shared education partnership and add ICT, use that to enhance the experience. And I've already done so. We've had shared teacher training through video conference. We've shared lessons between pupils and pupils, between the both schools. And the benefits that I see and that I'm aiming to implement in my new partnership will save money also. I mean, presently we spend approximately £2,500 on transporting pupils to and from one side of Coleraine to the other. And I would aim, at the very least, to cut that by a quarter by using video conferencing and communicating online.
We're going to pick up on the question of costs in a minute. Alison, unless you want to say anything about 3.3, may I go on to 3.4?
Yeah.
So you might say, this all sounds like a great plan. Where's the evidence that it actually has makes any difference to the children that take part? You'll find in the coloured version of the document a whole list of academic references, including this book that came out last year. I think I can say to you that the evidence is strong, that the impact of this on young people, even a year after they had stopped their participation in Dissolving Boundaries, still showed that they were more open, more curious, more interested in diversity than the children in the same schools that had not taken part. So that for us is an important finding. And I think, as Anton said, we need to bear in mind that for many of these youngsters, the idea of communicating with a distant audience is enormously motivating. They're not just producing work, forgive me, for their teachers. They're producing work that other children on another school are going to be looking at. And in many instances, teachers reported that this meant that the pupils took a great deal more care over what they sent, how much they sent. In other words, the overall quality of information improved as a result of having that connection. Alison, did you want to say anything about the impact on your children?
I mean, they could log on to the Dissolving Boundaries site from home, and I found that some of them wanted to do that. They were getting home, and I was finding posts, you know, at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening, so that they were really motivated to keep the link going. But it links so well into the ICT curriculum with the exchange, which is difficult to make a meaningful exchange, but this was a really meaningful exchange between children.
Colleagues, I'm sure you know this, but CCEA have an expectation that all schools now make sure that their pupils undertake a range of ICT tasks which are assessed. And those are grouped under 5 E's: explore, exhibit, evaluate, etc., etc. And one of them is E for exchange. In other words, an expectation that they use ICT to exchange with somebody else. And it's the one area that I think some schools struggled with unless they had a partnership with another school. Anton, yes?
I think the beauty of this type of approach is key here is ICT is now a cross-curricular skill. It's not a subject on its own. As a teacher, you're expected to use ICT through all your other subjects. So this approach is exactly how it is used, and it's really ICT is used as a vehicle, really, to support the children's learning in a cross-curricular sense.
Okay. If this is okay, Madam Chair, we'll just press on briefly. What have we learned about how you manage something like this? So 3.5 lessons for programme coordination. Well, the university took the lead, but I think I really want to emphasise the fact that we couldn't have done this had it not been for a very strong partnership with C2K, who of course provide all the hardware and all the schools. With CCEA, we worked very closely with them to ensure that the work we did was appropriate for these ICT assessment tasks. And we had the real benefit of advisors in the educational library boards nominating schools to take part. So we felt blessed to have such a strong partnership. And I think what this meant was that we were able to have a very, very wide range of schools, from special schools, Irish medium schools, primary schools. Every type of school that there is in Northern Ireland was represented in Dissolving Boundaries. Briefly, 3.6, the practicalities of this from the programme management. The university employed 2 staff, and I had 15% of my time protected to direct the programme. And I think I want to just underline the final sentence, that teachers felt strongly there was a need for third-party experts to train, support and encourage teachers in this specific area of education. I make the point, colleagues, because I'm aware that there has been some suggestion that money for shared education should simply go to schools and invite them to do what it is they want to do. I think we should reflect carefully on whether there's a role for third parties to play the kind of role that the university played in supporting what happened. 3.7, costs. What did we do? Well, we gave a grant of £350 to every school towards the cost of a face-to-face meeting. That was never actually enough to cover all the costs. And I think what's impressed us is the way in which the schools either covered the rest of this from their own resources, or they invited children and parents to contribute. Teachers who completed the agreed work programme had a grant of £500 in the first year, which reduced to £200 for subsequent years. This was a way of ensuring that when we had trained teachers in the first year, that we kept them in play In other words, that we sustained this. It wasn't a meteorite flashing through the sky briefly and then fizzling out. But this was a way of ensuring that the expertise that was being built up in the schools was sustained. So I think the key thing there is that the average cost per pupil of taking part was £75 per annum. I'm not sure what other figures you have, but for us that looked like exceptionally good value for money. So, final section from us. What are the possible implications for shared education? Well, when we've reviewed all the research and policy work that's been done up to now, I think it's fair to say that most of the energy has gone into moving children, busing them from one site to another. And of course there is a place for that. But in our view, insufficient attention has been paid to the role of ICT, and I just underline the point that every single school in Northern Ireland already has all the equipment they need to work together. It's there, provided through C2K, broadband is there, the video conferencing is there, and so is the virtual learning environment. All it needs is, if you like, a good purpose to use it. Second point, it makes use, this kind of approach uses the existing ICT infrastructure in a cost-effective way, and the skills that the children are learning in working with others who are a little bit different are not just good, if you like, for shared education, they're actually very, very important in the context of developing the kind of skills that employers want. So I think there's a real connection to the broader employability agenda. Anton, I think you wanted to come in and say something on these 2 points.
I agree as regards the skill with Rogers, as he said, regard to the skills, employability skills that employers are looking. Another key point as regards the programme, that it was specifically done in group tasks, so the children were divided into groups in both schools, and a key benefit that I saw was the actual interaction between the groups from school to school, but also within the group in the classroom situation.
Okay, thanks, Anton. Just to conclude, colleagues, 4.4, just to say to you that every school in Northern Ireland has been sent a copy of this document. And finally, to say to you that this year, the University of Ulster is running a prototype of what could be developed. It's called ePartners. It is going to include Alison's School. It includes students from the university going into the schools to act as a mentor. And again, the model is using technology to connect schools together with a face-to-face encounter. I have to say that our capacity in ePartners is limited in the sense that the funding comes through widening access, and that means that we can only work with schools that meet a particular criteria in terms of economic and social need. So just to make the point, Anton's school would not be allowed in, but Alison's would. We would very much like to be in a situation where we had the funds to be able to broaden this approach to recruit a much larger number of schools. So, colleagues, thank you very much for listening to that opening presentation from us. We're very happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation and also for the paper which you supplied to the committee. Obviously, the reports which we've seen are all very positive around dissolving boundaries, but why did the funding essentially end in 2014?
You probably need to ask the Department of Education that question. We were not really given a clear answer. I have a sense that, because obviously they were working in partnership with Dublin, I think, if one can believe the rumours, Dublin, civil servant in Dublin decided that 15 years was quite long enough, thank you, and it was time to review not only Dissolving Boundaries but also the European Studies Programme, which had been running for an even longer period of time. So I think they wanted to possibly say, we're going to take stock and stop these programmes and have an opportunity to stand back and reflect and review on the best way forward.
Okay, and obviously, I mean, you have talked about this new prototype that you program which you're looking at, but has that left a vacuum where you once were able to bring schools together, particularly around the ICT project?
Yes, it has.
And have those schools continued any relationships since then?
To a very limited extent. We know this because we encouraged them to continue. I think this was an instance where the absence of a coordinating third party made it very difficult for the schools.
Yes, I mean, I did contact my partner school whenever we heard that the funding was ending, but I haven't heard back. I would have been keen to continue this, but if something goes wrong with the video conferencing, well, there wouldn't have been a safe site for the children to communicate through, would have been the first thing. And the video conferencing we could have done, and then with the help of C2K, they would have supported us in any problems with that. But I think it's so important for teachers to get together at the beginning of a project, at the beginning of the academic year, and plan to go forward and agree, you know, sign it, as Roger said, a contract to go forward with that.
From a shared education standpoint, I know my current school, when the money ran out through PI project, this whole idea of sustainability, the whole point of the project was that it would be sustainable after, with or without funding, but when it comes down to it, and the funding helps to kind of make that partnership strong, and the point that I made previously as regards transport to and from schools, unless you have that significant amount of funding, which we are very lucky to have presently through Queen's University. If we did not have that funding, well then, yes, we could have continue the partnership, but it would be it would be a shadow of what it possibly could be, and that's where the point I made previously, the role of ICT here can help to limit the amount of money that you possibly would need to spend.
Okay. So, but were this approach to be mainstream, particularly around a shared education programme, which sort of elements of what you have done through Dissolving Boundaries do you believe would be successful enough to be included in that type of programme?
Which elements? I think the key things are bring the teachers together to plan. Obviously, there is a cost involved in doing that. Ensure that the technology is available for them to use, and that would be both in Northern Ireland. There is a new video conferencing piece of software called Collaborate. That's what we're going to be using in ePartners. And the VLE, the Virtual Learning Environment, is Fronter. So in ePartners, we're going to be bringing the teachers together in January. They'll be trained in how to use Collaborate and Fronter. These are the two crucial tools for the children to work together. So that is the absolute minimum core that you need. You've got to have time to bring the teachers together. The technology's got to be in place. And then thirdly, all the evidence we have suggests that even a short face-to-face meeting, if it is seen as being connected into the work and the online work, has a really substantial benefit.
Okay. And you've very clear evidence of a project which has worked. And I'm just wondering whether the department has approached you in preparation of policy for the development of a shared education bill?
Indirectly, the inspector responsible for shared education has been to see us, attended a symposium that we ran to launch this pamphlet, and I understand that she is offering advice to the Department of Education on future policy development. And I think she took the point that in all of the different approaches that there are, that a blended approach which included ICT was really essential, because how else would you reach all those outlying rural primary schools, the ones that otherwise would find it exceptionally difficult or very costly to meet up with other schools.
My present school is an example of one of those schools Roger's talking about. In our most recent inspection report this September 2014, the inspectors reported that our shared education partnership was an exemplar of best practice, but that they also noted that it wasn't just beneficial for our school, for a school of our size, but that it was essential due to our rural and isolated location. We have a beautiful school up in Castle Rock overlooking the sea on top of a mountain, so it's we are rural, we are isolated, but this link up that we have with Castle Rock Primary School is essential, and that has been backed up by ETI.
Thank you very much. Mr. Craig.
Thanks, Chair. Welcome to the committee, Professor Austin. Very welcome as far as I'm concerned. My old university, that's why.
Thank you.
Fascinated with this. I would be one of these sort of technical people who loves this sort of thing. But I can see a very, very clear implication in all of this already. With the aerial learning communities with regard to A-level in schools. Now, one of the big conundrums there is always, how do you provide a wide enough range of choices for pupils? And the big issue for all of the schools has always been this issue of transporting children between the different secondary schools to provide that. This clearly has implications as to how you circumvent that entire issue. Do you agree with that? And if there is something there, what would the additional cost to the school be? What technology do they need to implement, and what are the cost implications there to bring them up to that standard? Because there's clearly that can be offset against transport costs or removing them.
Thank you very much for that question. Everything, of course, I've said in this paper and my colleagues have been talking about is really about Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3. But you're absolutely right. What this is doing is to build a set of ICT skills amongst teachers and young people that would really come into their own when we get to 14 to 16 and 16 to 18 in terms of the better access to a wider range of examination courses. Now, I think that is already very common practice in parts of Newfoundland because of their geographical situation. And the research from there indicates that there's no diminution in the overall performance of candidates who take courses online when they're still at school. But the very big advantage is that when they go to university, they're already prepared to be much more autonomous and to fit in better into the kind of learning experience that they're going to encounter at university. So to answer your specific question about area learning communities, I think the way that you'd have to do this is that, I hope this is not heresy, but actually I would say, let's have a look at the whole of Northern Ireland and say, where is there a need for either an academic or a vocational subject which can't be met easily because there are only one or two pupils in many schools that want to take it? The answer, if you were to follow the Newfoundland model, is to say you create exemplary online resources, first of all, and you could do that in Fronter, but then you need to have locally support and backup, which would, in my view, would be provided by the staff in the area learning communities. So it's a combination of having excellent online materials and then local support within the area learning community. So the costs actually would be relatively small. I mean, you'd probably have to second either teachers or experts to create the content online and then make it available for all of the schools that wish to sign up for it.
And sure, coming back on that, I'm no disagreement with what you're saying. Is there any resistance in teachers themselves around this? Now, I'm thinking probably of those who have been in education a lot longer than others. I call it fear of new technology more than anything. In your experience of implementing this, did you come up against this?
I think that was an issue when we started in 1980. I began doing this kind of work in 1986, and at that time there was I think a number of teachers who were fearful of technology. I think it's less and less the case, partly because, of course, every student going through teacher training at the moment, whether in Northern Ireland or elsewhere, are getting substantial online and ICT experience. I think there's probably still some caution when it comes to public examinations. But I mean, you probably already know this, but I mean, moving image A-level is already being provided partly online, and is very popular. So I think, provided that there is adequate support, I can't see any reason why other subjects shouldn't be treated in the same way.
Yeah, it obviously brings a completely new concept to the whole principle of teaching right across the board, and it strikes me that younger teachers will accept that much faster than those who have been used to a different way of doing it, and I think that's what I'm trying to get at here.
Interestingly, in Canada, they had to create a new type of teacher called an M teacher, a mediating teacher. So these were teachers in schools that might not necessarily be a specialist in the subject, but their job was to ensure that the pupils that were taking the online course got to the right place at the right time if there was a video conference, ensure that they logged on. In other words, there was local support for the pupils to be able to do this, even if the teacher in the school was not necessarily a subject specialist.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologise to Professor Austin because I have to go at 11. But can I say thank you to you and your colleagues, because you've actually made the paper report actually come alive in what you've been saying, and your enthusiasm is obviously spilling over into the committee today. Just a couple of points. There are obviously, I think, certainly factors that need to be taken into account in the shared education, in the work that you have done, the very positive work that you have done. I ask two questions. First of all, in terms of the limited face-to-face that pupils have, and certainly the concept that I would have in my mind about shared education means a lot of contact between pupils face-to-face. Secondly, if the work that you had, and I think the Chair has touched on this one, if the work that you have done was to be mainstreamed, what would be the implications for that, really?
Well, the face-to-face contact in dissolving boundaries, and Anton and Alison will tell you, was often no more than the pupils meeting for a day. Yeah. And I have to say, I'm still astonished, really, that even such a small amount of face-to-face contact appeared to have such a... What we saw immediately after that was a big surge in online activity. Not to mention increased exchange of messages before the face-to-face contact. So I think I can say to you that the evidence that we've got suggests that even limited face-to-face contact seems to be hugely motivating when it is part of this extended year-long online working together. I don't know whether you want to say anything about that?
Well, definitely the build-up of relationships that happened during the video conferencing. And that to begin with, it was, just their names and their favourite sports or something. But when they saw that they had so many things in common, and one year group decided to start playing their musical instruments. I had sort of left them alone, and the children just, I can do this, and then the other side they were doing that back, and they built up a relationship themselves, which was almost like a real face-to-face relationship because of the video conferencing. It was great.
Well, I suppose one of the key decisions we had always had to make each year at the start when we planned out what we were going to do was when we were going to have a face-to-face meeting. And Normally, most partnerships would have left it to the end of the year. There was one particular year where I decided to try it at the start of the year, and I found that worked just as well. That they actually met the other pupils from the other school. They knew the names, and they were able to talk through their likes, their dislikes, and got a feel for each other. And then, whenever they went online, they were able to actually talk more to each other about what they were learning.
The key thing there, I think, is to try to make sure that the face-to-face thing doesn't happen right at the very end, when there's then no opportunity, if you like, to follow through on it. So I hope that answered you.
Yeah, and the mainstreaming, if it were to be mainstreamed, what are they?
Well, if it was to be mainstreamed, I would say it could be done, it seems to me, in a relatively manageable way in terms of cost. I think it does need a third party. I can say to you that, I mean, the University of Ulster would be very interested in continuing to play the role that it has in this area of work. I don't foresee any reason why this approach could not connect every single school.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation today. I mean, I agree in terms of the insufficient focus sometimes on ICT, I think, across a number of sectors. I think that goes without saying, but particularly in relation to the reviews that were conducted around dissolving boundaries, and there's been very solid reviews done, I think, and very positive feedback from them. But one of the issues was from the ETI review and the DESI review in 2010-11 about the programme being more linked with community relations in terms of greater use of online tools. Has there been, is there any thinking going on? Has the programme itself adapted or have a view on community relations?
I want to make sure I understood your question. So most of the work would have been, if you like, around the subjects in the curriculum, and you're saying that this didn't always lead to the development of community relations.
Yeah, well, one of the things, just to be clear, one of the things that the review had said was that the work of the programme should be more closely linked.
Yeah. Well, as a result of that ETI report, I then made all of the research data available to those responsible for community relations in all the 5 boards. But of course, we had to leave it up to them to decide how best to implement it. And I think it's probably true to say that not everybody would have shared my enthusiasm for the way that ICT and face-to-face work could be done together. So I think there's a great opportunity, if I can put it that way now.
Okay, and it's probably slightly linked, but you touched on it in your presentation around the definition of shared education, and I'm just wondering, in your view, should shared education be defined simply as educational outcomes, or should societal benefits be included in any definition?
I think it should be both. Certainly when we think about shared education, I think I'm saying there is a real benefit in children from different parts, different communities coming together. So there should be benefits in terms of use of technology, there should be benefits in terms of the curriculum work they do, and there should be benefits for society in terms of just a greater acceptance and respect and tolerance for difference.
Okay. And just another point, Chair, if you will. I know you referred to the fact that this was a cross-border project, and I know you referred to schools engaging with schools that are further away. In my case, the school might be 10 minutes down the road, but yeah. I'm thinking specifically about obstacles that you may have encountered developing that All-Ireland cross-border project.
It's not a secret to say that particularly at the beginning, there were some controlled schools that were apprehensive about taking part. I think they feared that Parents might dislike what they were doing, even though they themselves could see lots of educational benefits. But actually those anxieties were often turned out to be groundless, and teachers and principals became very adept at drawing parents in and involving them, even to the extent of ensuring that parents came with the children if there was a face-to-face meeting on the other side of the border. So there were, can't say that everybody was instantly enthusiastic. There were some people that had reservations. But I think that once they began to see the benefits, and particularly the added motivation that they could see their children having when they went home, I think even sceptical parents turned out to be persuaded that this was a good thing to do.
Yeah. But I'm thinking, just Chair, in terms of education as an area of cooperation, that how this work can identify some of those All-Ireland cross-border working relationships in terms of ICT and how that can be flushed out, I suppose, in relation to your work.
We haven't been asked by the North-South Ministerial Council to reflect on what we've learned from dissolving boundaries. All I can say is that if we were asked, we'd be very happy to go along and probably take a copy of this leaflet with us. I think the ending of funding is a pity, and it has certainly left a gap in terms of educational links on a cross-border basis. I, however, am a pragmatist, and I see an immediate and pressing need to try and draw lessons from this that can help us all in terms of shared education within Northern Ireland.
Okay, and just definitely finally, Chair, the external agency that you talked about, the third-party influence, has that been costed?
Well, it's costed in the figure of £75 per pupil. So, that, in other words, that figure is made up of the budget was a certain amount of money to employ staff by the university and provide the grants to the pupils.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Lunn.
Yeah, thanks very much for your presentation. It's been very interesting. And you've, in your answer to Robin Newton's question about the sort of the level of contact, I mean, the pupils, you've actually helped perhaps pointed the way for us, because for those of us who think that the jury is still out on the whole shared education project, the main objection would be that the lack of potential societal benefit, and that you transport your kids to another school for half a day or a couple of periods or whatever at quite a bit of cost. And that's all the contact there is, and that doesn't develop from there. So this idea that the kids get to know each other, even at a long distance in this case, and start to exchange and so on, that's reassuring for me in terms of the potential for the shared education programme. Yeah. Because, I don't want to start and advocate for integrated education, but they would say that they're at the point, their starting point is where the shared education programme is trying to get to in societal terms. So I think that's a good pointer for us, at least.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think I can say it's a new model. When we put this book together last year, it was the first time anybody had produced research globally on how you can use the internet in a way that builds community cohesion. So the book's called Online Learning and Community Cohesion, with examples both from Northern Ireland, the island of Ireland, and the Middle East. So I think it's a robust model. And I think if it's got something really going for it, it is this capacity to reach out to everybody. I would hate to think that shared education was only available for a few children who happen to be in geographical proximity to a different school.
Is the emphasis more at the moment, or well, it's finished now, but has it been more on the primary level than secondary?
In Dissolving Boundaries, we had roughly 50-50. And of course, there were appreciable numbers of children in special schools as well. At the moment, I can say that ePartners, we ran that last year, and again, it was a mixture of primary and secondary. So I can say that in some respects, it's a little easier, and I hope you don't mind me saying that, in primary schools, simply because the teacher has got the class all day long. It's a little easier to fit in a video conferencing. If you're in a secondary school and you've only got 40 minutes for history or maths, and you've then got to go somewhere else to do the video conferencing, it's a bit more complicated. So there are some logistical difficulties, I think, in the post-primary sector. Not insuperable, but I think it is more of a challenge for them.
Yes. Probably more concentration on a particular subject.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the way that the timetable is structured into these short blocks of time.
And in terms of your two schools, I mean, how much time would you actually spend on this in the course of a week? So, you know, formally and the link with another school?
It's hard to break it down in the course of the week. Some weeks there might have been a lot of work done on it. We would have been video conferencing at least once a month, and sometimes once a fortnight. And then the children would have been Moodling.
That's using the VLE.
Yes, it's like a bit like texting or emailing each other.
Sorry, what's a VLE?
Learning environment.
And I know it also.
Virtual learning environment. Yeah.
So it was a bit like...
But a safe area inside the internet.
That's okay, I've got
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
So they would have been doing that probably every week, and some of them would have been going home and doing it. And then the projects that we set up probably would have been, I don't know, an hour a week all year.
My experience is very similar to Alison's. The way it worked, because it was a cross-border project, and I'll emphasise this point again that Roger made, their curriculum is structured differently to ours, and their peaks and troughs, really, to get the two matching together at the same time, so there may have been a surge of activity 1 month, and then because there was something else happening in the school down south. Whereas my experience through the shared education, because our curriculum in the two schools is the same, we do the same world around us topics, the teachers plan together, they do the same lessons, evaluate together.
Sure.
Much easier.
I would guess at the primary level that it might be a case of trying to get the kids to stop doing it rather than, you know, time limiting. I mean, that does sound like fun, actually.
To keep them focused is a difficulty, and to keep it focused on the learning as such, but I suppose there is that kind of interactive element which you don't want to take away from either, and building that friendship and relationship online.
Yeah. I certainly think you've given us a lot of food for thought here, I'll say that. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just before we move to Mr. Kinnan, can I welcome A-levels politics students from Lurgan College. You're very welcome to this morning's committee, and I hope that you enjoy your short time with us. Mr. Kinnan.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chair, and apologies for not being there at the beginning. I found that quite fascinating. I'm sceptical of, but coming over to your point of view, I was fascinated. I've had a lot of complaints this summer about our C2K system, our computer system, not working. And I'm less aimed at you, Professor, but more at the others. Are our computer systems up to this, or do we really need, when we do the next contract, get ones in that are that much better and more able?
No systems are perfect, but what C2K does really well is to ensure that the children are completely safe online. And that's a real consideration for parents. If they're doing any online work, they need to know that there's no risk whatsoever of predators getting in to any of the online work. In terms of reliability, I think what's impressed me about C2K is that they listen. We made some complaints about the quality of sound and the video conferencing system we were using before, called Illuminate. They listened, and they're in the process of introducing a new bit of software called Collaborate. So this is an improved video conferencing system with much better quality sound. In terms of the VLE, the virtual learning environment, I've heard different views about Fronter, which is the one that is in place in many schools. Some teachers love it and some are not so keen on it. But I think what I'd say is we shouldn't get hung up on any particular product. It's the process. It's the, if it isn't Fronter, it's Moodle. Or the point is that there are systems there that enable the children to do two really crucial things. First of all, to have a sort of a forum where they can exchange fairly informal information, and then a work area. So this is where they're actually creating content on the topic that they're working on. And we've seen some fabulous examples where one school has put their work up in one colour, and the children in the other school have come along and said, yeah, we've got a bit to add here. In goes their stuff in a different colour. So they're contributing to the construction of knowledge in a way which still recognises the contributions that both sides have made. So I think we've got to keep the pressure on C2K to keep delivering what we have. But when I compare what we have here even with the rest of the UK, you could not do what we're proposing here in England.
Right.
Simply because they don't have a common platform.
Yep.
So I have to say, we are in a uniquely advantaged position to take advantage of this opportunity.
And the other angle to it, going to the other end of it, is the teachers, we throw so much at you, or the department throws so much at you, whether you get this, not necessarily getting enough support from the boards or in the future. Is much time needed in your busy schedule? I mean, is that going to be one of our biggest problems, actually, teachers having time to do the preparation and the training for this, given everything else we throw at you?
One quick word and then I'll bring it. I think you do need a third party to coordinate the training, to lay down the parameters of what's to be done. Then the teachers go back, and we've tried as hard as we can to say, this should not be on top of what you already have to do. Right. This is an enriched way of delivering the curriculum. Is that right, Alison?
Yes, definitely. I mean, you definitely need the training.
Yeah.
In the technology, and as Roger says, it's changing again. So we'll need training in this new Collaborate when we've just, when we got used to the Illuminate. And although Illuminate did let us down on occasion, C2K were usually there to try and help solve the problems. But yes, training and collaboration with your time with your partner school is very important.
In my experience, C2K are extremely good as regards technical issues, as regards the software and the hardware. But I do strongly support the point of Roger that if you had a third party, which we did through Dissolving Boundaries, where you could lift the phone as regards training, upskilling of staff, and actually motivating and inspiring you to think of more creative ways to use the technology. The technology is there. The reliability of it can, like with any technology, can be up or down. But I mean, it's I suppose it's there to be used if the teacher necessarily wants to use it.
One point I might just make, Danny, is that the two staff that were employed on Dissolving Boundaries had a really important role in monitoring the flow of information between the schools. So because it was all happening in C2K, we could see all of the messages that were being exchanged. And it wasn't as though we wanted to be like Big Brother, but what it meant was that if we noticed that one school was not contributing, somebody picked up the phone and said, is there a difficulty? Can we come in and help? Sometimes a teacher had gone off sick or their system had crashed, but we felt an obligation to make sure that the other school was aware of the difficulty, smooth things over. So I wouldn't underestimate the importance of that. Bringing schools together is it's not easy. I mean, these guys are already doing a full-time job, and the challenge of working with another school shouldn't be underestimated. So I think somebody being there to assist is probably necessary. Sometimes think about, the French and the Germans after 1945, who are still putting money into Franco-German youth exchanges. because they could see there was a long-term issue that needed to be addressed, namely the relations between the two countries.
We saw a bit of that with the British Council.
Yeah.
That was great. But look, thank you. I've learned a great deal today. So.
Thank you. And our next presentation is from the Centre for Shared Education at Queen's, and I was just wondering what links there might be between the work that you're doing and the work that they're currently doing, and whether you've had any discussions.
Not directly. You'll understand that in the world that we live in, there's naturally enough areas where we can collaborate, and there are others where I suppose we're competitors.
We haven't quite dissolved the boundaries between the two universities.
Yeah. Well, the spirit is willing, I can say, on our part. I think there is benefit, if I can put it that way, to be gained from a greater understanding on the part of both universities in terms of what each of us are doing. I think it's probably fair to say that the work that Queen's is doing is very good, but as far as I know, they haven't really included ICT as a significant element of that. And that's just an accident of a particular trajectory. We got involved in technology very early on, and it was a sort of a natural development for us to look to technology as part of the way that we address these things.
Perhaps this committee might be the facilitator of that.
With pleasure.
But I do welcome presentation and the work which you have given to us, and I look forward to actually being included in some of our recommendations. But if there's any further information which you'd like to give to the committee after today, we certainly be very willing to receive that. So
right.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
time.
Thank you very much.
Idea of facility. Back to work. Want to make it work.
If members are content that we perhaps write to the department just to explore the reasons why the programme funding did come to an end, given the evidence that we've been presented with, and also to ask the extent of conversations which they've had with the university in preparation for the policy development.
Or even, sorry, Chair, even if you want to add in the question, if it's something they would consider within Northern Ireland, if it's a problem, if there's no
If it's an issue,
funding,
yeah, of course.
with Republic of Ireland funding, then it could happen between schools in Northern Ireland. So,
Yeah. Well, as part of the shared education programme.
yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes?
I was slightly concerned when the only link that seemed to be with the shared education was the inspectorate.
Yes.
Well, I think, Chair, what they might have been referring to, Christina Graham is now the Director of Sharing, and she was in the Inspectorate, so I think that's what they meant. But when we write to them, we can find that out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Okay, thank you very much. Now, our next presentation is from the Centre for Shared Education at Queen's University. Just refer you to the clerk's cover note at page 53 and to relevant papers, including briefing notes from the Centre for Shared Education at Queen's. And I can just advise everyone that we have Hansard, so everything which you say will be recorded. Can I welcome all our witnesses? We have Professor Joanne Hughes, Professor Tony Gallagher, Dr. Gavin Duffy, and Professor Miles Houston. You're all very welcome. Thank you very much for being with us today. And can I ask you to make an opening statement, and members will follow up with some questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to say a few words and then invite my colleagues to introduce themselves and say a few words. So my name is Joanne Hughes. I'm Director of the Centre for Shared Education at Queen's. The centre was established in 2012. Our vision is as an applied and interdisciplinary centre which is committed to researching and promoting evidence-based practice in all areas of education. Many of us within the centre have been involved in exploring issues relating to education in divided societies for many years. The shared education approach is based on an analysis of the existing education system in Northern Ireland and efforts to promote community relations within it. And it pointed to a twofold approach to community relations in Northern Ireland and indeed in other divided societies. So we've had short-term contact initiatives or full immersion integrated education. The shared model which is theory-informed, kind of plugs the gap between those initiatives which are known to be largely ineffective, the short-term contact initiatives, and integrated education, which is effective but has had limited impact or appeal. We have defined shared education as collaborative activity between schools from different sectors that's underpinned by a commitment to reconciliation objectives and can contribute towards school improvement, access to opportunity and more positive intergroup relations in divided societies. And when we talk about theory-informed, we refer to two bodies of theory. The first is contact theory, which asserts that contact between different groups, provided it meets certain conditions, can be effective in reducing prejudice and promoting more positive social attitudes, not just towards the individuals involved in the contact situation. This is not about making exceptions to the rule, but towards the outgroup as a whole. The conditions for effective contact are listed in our submission, but a key point to mention is that contact should allow for the development of more intimate ties, usually associated with friendship. And in this respect, it should be sustained over time. Identity should also at some level be salient in contact encounters in order to maximise its effectiveness. The second body of theory relates to networks and collaboration, and this theory highlights characteristics of effective collaboration in relation to school improvement. The work of the Centre is organised around three interrelated strands of activity. We have a substantial programme of national and international research. In terms of our programme activity, we have delivered a shared education programme in Northern Ireland and are involved in developing and delivering similar programmes in other divided jurisdictions. We've developed, in terms of education, bespoke training programmes for practitioners and policymakers involved in the delivery of shared education, and we're also developing master's pathways. Our research findings are clear that increasing contact between pupils from different divided groups, in the case of Northern Ireland Catholics and Protestants, has the effect of reducing prejudice, increasing trust and generally promoting a more positive response to the outgroup or the other. We've shown that this happens in a range of educational settings: integrated schools, separate schools that have a significant proportion of pupils from the other community, shared education contexts where pupils have an opportunity to engage in sustained curriculum-based interaction. We've also shown that the effect of sustained contact is diminished for free school meal recipients, although there's still an effect for these pupils. We also know that outcomes are different for pupils in more divided communities. For them, there is sometimes a dissonance between the values promoted by the school, which are around mutual understanding, respect for difference and so on, and the values that are valorised in the local community or the home environment, which are sometimes to do with suspicion or sense of threat. Our research also suggests that the current grammar-secondary divide can be a hurdle to sharing. It can be difficult for secondary school pupils to attend the local grammar, and there have been some issues around them feeling intimidated. The intersection between faith and class in Northern Ireland may exacerbate this problem. There's generally a receptiveness to shared education in Northern Ireland schools, and our research has shown that this is related to the foregrounding of other educational priorities, which means that teachers don't feel under the same pressure to engage with issues that are controversial, although many do. There are educational benefits to be accrued from participation in sharing, not least in terms of the entitlement framework, and there may be additional benefits. Separate schools are a cherished representation of community and individual identity, and a value of sharing, not just in Northern Ireland as we found, but in other divided jurisdictions, is that separate schools, which many people have a strong attachment to, are perceived not to be threatened. In terms of the collaborative process, schools have been remarkably engaged and ingenious in terms of overcoming some of the barriers that can arise. And these include practical issues like the coordination of timetables, pastoral care policies, transport and community relations work to minimise opposition to the initiative, so communicating with parents, working with local community representatives and local community elites. Schools have also worked collaboratively with local agencies to tackle issues that are particular to a locality. In terms of what might enable shared education, a policy framework that requires schools to engage in intersectoral sharing reflected in inspection criteria for schools. Shared education should be a compulsory element of ITE, initial teacher education, reflected in modules or workshops on diversity in the classroom, for example, or collaboration in practice, and this should also be reflected in continuing professional development. The delivery of shared education should reflect optimal conditions for effective contact and effective collaboration, and these are outlined in our longer submission. And finally, there is a potential tension between foregrounding educational outcomes over reconciliation outcomes to maximise participation by schools and the need to keep salient issues of difference in order to maximise the generalisability of attitudinal and behavioural change amongst participants. So that's my statement. I'd like to introduce my colleagues, so Dr Gavin Duffy, who's a researcher within the Centre, Professor Tony Gallagher, Pro-Vice-Chancellor at Queen's, and Professor Miles Houston from Oxford University, who is Director of the Oxford Centre for the Study of Intergroup Relations. So, Tony, if you want to.
Okay, just two quick points. Thanks very much, first of all, for the invitation to come along. But two quick points. One is as Joanne sort of alluded to, some of the evidence. The nature of the challenge in different parts of Northern Ireland, whenever schools are trying to work collaboratively, is very different. And one of the things that's been very important in the work that we've been doing with school collaborations is to develop bespoke models in different places, recognise the importance of context, but give a lot of autonomy and influence to teachers to work with this and trying to develop the best way to do this. And I think that's a particularly important part of the approach we have taken to shared education. Second point, I suppose, is that the terminology shared education has now become so ubiquitous. It's been applied to a vast range of different things. We're very clear that when we talk about shared education, we're talking about very robust work with serious collaboration and engagement between schools that's sustained and is long-term and changes the nature of the relationship between schools in a way which actually is going to lead to very significant positive changes for the young people, for the teachers, for the parents and for the wider communities. So we have a very particular understanding of what shared education means, even though I suppose the way the term is used now, it's covering a much wider umbrella, stuff which we wouldn't necessarily always see as falling within our understanding of it. So Mr. Hughes, just a couple of quick points to begin. Niles, do you want to?
To add to the points made so far, I'd like to say also thank you very much for talking to us. My colleagues in England sometimes have great difficulty getting to talk to anyone about the policy implications of their work. I've always found ears in Northern Ireland much more open, so thank you for that. I'd like to add to what Professor Hughes said, that one of the other things we're able to show in our work is the value of contact, not just in changing attitudes to what we call primary outgroups, the most obvious outgroups that people come into contact with, but also secondary outgroups, so that actually one of the benefits of promoting positive mixing between groups such as Catholic and Protestant students is that they also develop more tolerant attitudes towards ethnic minorities, for example. Another of the things that we focused on in our work is that the benefits of contact don't just accrue from direct face-to-face contact. I couldn't miss the opportunity to hear my colleague Roger Austin speak to you just before I came in. I'm a great fan of the implications of what new technology can offer in the kind of work that he does. And I smiled at your understanding that we had not yet got these two universities together, because the links are absolutely obvious. I think you can see that the opportunities for sequential work where people might begin their contact in the kind of relaxed confines, distance learning through ICT, then you organise face-to-face contact, and then, as he said, the face-to-face contact is followed by a burst of online contact. So these things work together. Contact is not always positive. Contact can be negative, and one of the ironies is that where you bring people together, you're likely to see more positive contact, but you're also likely to see more negative contact. You can't possibly be bullied by a boy from the out-group if you don't go to school with boys from the out-group. The good news there, however, is that in our very recent work, we find that even though there may be greater evidence for negative contact in these mixed settings, positive contact has this very clear buffering effect. Prior positive contact buffers you, it strengthens you. It means that you don't respond to that negative contact with an increase in your own intolerance or aggression towards the other side. And finally, just to show that we are not we are optimists, but we're not idealists. And one of the things we always have to be aware of is that we don't create conditions for mixing or desegregation, only then to find, as they did do in schools in the United States after they desegregated in 1954, that children themselves choose to resegregate. You go in through the front door, The black kids are all on the basketball team and the football team. The white kids are doing the school newspaper and the tennis club. So you have to be alert to that possibility, and you have to work, once you've gone inside the doors, to promote mixing at various kinds of levels. And the work we're doing with the centre right at the moment that is completely new is we're looking in detail at people's social networks. We're looking at the intimacy of people's friendship groups to see if we can ascertain just how close the relations are between members of different communities in their friendship networks.
Morning, committee. My name is Gavin Duffy. I'm a research fellow at the School of Education, and I've been attached to the Sharing Education programme since around 2011. My kind of research takes a different tact in the sense that my work has been essentially qualitative and has been around trying to provide contextual data and contextual information about what actually happens inside schools and the relationships between schools. So a lot of my work has been underpinned by the notion of collaborative effectiveness, and I'm particularly interested in trying to draw out what makes a strong partnership, what makes an effective partnership, and so hopefully I can get an opportunity to talk to you about that through this morning.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your very detailed and paper which has come to the committee as part of your evidence. There were quite a number of questions probably that we could ask around this, and time is always limited, but a lot of your work is very much about the education focus. And I think that's been very clear, particularly in the presentations which we received earlier with Cross and Passion and Ballycastle High School, and I think members could not be impressed by the work which is going on there around shared education. But you have also talked in your papers about the limited reach of integrated education, and also the suspicion that there exists within our communities. But do you see a time when shared education will be mainstreamed?
Well, I think we're probably not far off that point at the moment in many senses when you look at the range of programmes which are being put in place from the department, potentially through the European Peace Money, the Shared Campuses Initiative. There's a whole range of things which are, we're on the cusp, I think, of going into a situation where the working assumption is that schools should work with other schools, not just to promote cohesion, but also because it's good educationally and it makes more effective use of resources. So I think we're very close to the point where we can get to there. And that one of the advantages of the shared education approach, the idea of using collaboration, is that it's possible to do that through across as much of the system as possible without the sort of the tensions and difficulties involved with threats to identity. It sort of squares the circle in a way which is part of its attraction. And if we can get it into that sort of situation, then it's going to change the nature of relationships between people, and who knows, that opens up all sorts of possibilities for further development and evolution in the future.
And you talked about bespoke models and contextualising situations, and really that there isn't a one-size-fits-all in order to achieve the outcome. Are there particular examples which you found to have maybe surpassed your expectation whenever you've gone into to looking at a solution for schools in certain areas?
Well, I suppose Gavin can maybe say a little bit about some of the work in sort of Derry Londonderry around the Contested Spaces project, because there's some amazing stuff happening there. But I mean, a case like Ballycastle, which you mentioned, I mean, one of the things which I find incredibly inspirational about the way that they're approaching it is they have agreed as two schools basically to hook their fates together through the Shared Campus Initiative by each delivering a part of the curriculum that the other depends on. That speaks to a level of trust between the schools which I just find amazing. I think you see a similar sort of thing in Limavady, where the level of engagement between the schools and the imagination and creativity that the teachers in the schools are showing, I think, is also impressive. There's been a few situations like that where teachers, given the space and the freedom to try things and to do things, have responded in a way which I just think is amazing. And as part of the value of the work, I think, is to, rather than simply imposing a particular template or model on schools and then requiring them to do it, giving teachers space to be part of the creating a solution, allowing them to try things sometimes that don't work, but learning from that, I think, has been a very valuable part of the whole experience at making the models work. So apart from that, one of the main general lessons that we have taken out of working with the collaborative networks over the last 6-7 years, is that the more points of contact between the schools, the better. Because the more intersections there are, the tighter the interweave, as it were, between the schools, then the more likely it will be sustained into the future. And the sort of work that Miles and Joanna's doing is demonstrating then the positive consequences that can arise from that. And it's creating a situation where that becomes permanent. That becomes the way in which things just happen, a new habit of reality, if you like. So rather than sort of small programmes or connections on particular sort of tightly defined areas of activity, encourage as many connections as possible. And Gavin, do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yep, the Foyle Contested Space Education Partnership based in Derry, Londonderry, was an alternative model of collaboration, and it effectively evolved out of the first phase of the Shared Education Programme, which was between 2007 and 2010. And it was funded by OFM, DFM, Atlantic Philanthropies, and it was part of their contested space, interface and contested space programme. This model is reasonably unique in Northern Ireland in the sense that it's made up of eight schools. So 5 of them are primary schools, 3 are post-primary schools, and they're obviously across sectors. What's incredible about this is it was a combination of an educational and a social approach to addressing social need areas. So there were 5 particular social need areas that schools collectively decided that these were issues for them, and so conversations took place prior to the formation of the partnership, where the schools tried to identify common social need areas, and they identified 5 areas. One of them was antisocial behaviour, another was improving community relations in a contested space setting, another was to look at the impact of substance misuse, and then to look collectively at areas such as health and sexual resilience, and also looking at the appropriate and safe use of the internet and social media. Now, as a social needs kind of based programme, it was important for the schools to locate that within the curriculum, because that's part of what the core business of what the schools do. And this ran from Key Stage right through to Key Stage 3. So it basically was a programme for pupils aged 8 right up to the age of 15. And so the programme was delivered on a shared basis, and it exposed young people to different cultural and religious practices along the way. And it required the collaboration and the collaboration of teachers and principals and senior leaders within schools. And so with that was a partnership infrastructure that was established to try to support the partnership. So to give you an idea of the type of numbers involved, there were 1,161 pupils involved in this programme, and this was a case of 1,000 odd pupils moving between schools on a weekly basis for a period of 3 years. To support that, then there was an infrastructure of 8 principals, 3 vice principals, 35 teachers, and an external primary coordinator. And part of what emerged out of this partnership for us was, well, for me, it was about being able to provide contextual evidence of the practice of shared education, but there's also an opportunity for us to be able to identify effective collaboration as well. And the partnership, and from a research perspective, was able to represent quite a number of perspectives, and that of the pupils, of teachers, of school leaders, and of parents. It was also an opportunity as well for the primary voice to be heard. From what I understand, the primary voice in terms of shared education is relatively quiet, and so this was an opportunity to kind of get the perspective of the primary schools across. And the big thing was that it demonstrated 2 things: social and educational impact. And if you can bear with me, in terms of the social impacts, I mean, we're talking about encouraging the movement, as I said, of over 1,000 pupils, educators and pupils across contested space settings. Now, a piece of research done by Ellen Roche in Queen's suggested that there is a thing called bounded contentment, and it's this idea that there are over generations, there's a reluctance to tend to move in between each other's communities in a contested space setting. So we are talking about communities such as Derry and Londonderry, or places like North Belfast, which have often been described as a patchwork quilt, and there's a tendency, I think, with communities to locate themselves within their own communities and not to move. And so that was an important point, that we had over 1,000 pupils and roughly 40 educators moving in between, and hundreds of parents. It provided an opportunity for meaningful contact between participants from different cultural and religious backgrounds. We have evidences of from the research, that it reduced prejudices, that it challenged ethnic and denominational isolation. Social relationships began to form as well. So these social relationships are friendships between young people. They're friendships both on a personal and a professional basis between teachers and between school leaders. But we also found evidences of these things extending beyond the classroom, and things like social media were a great way for young people to engage with one another outside of the school environment. The partnership also connects schools in the community and making stronger links between agencies such as statutory agencies and voluntary agencies. In terms of educational impacts then, so the Contested Space Partnership established and supported a sustainable cross-sectoral partnership of schools in what is perhaps one of the most highly contested spaces in Northern Ireland. It developed a cross-sectoral teacher network, which is really important, and from that came personal development opportunities and capacity building. It also established a collaborative school leadership network. Some of our leaders described the whole role of being a principal as being quite a lonely job, and connecting 8 principals together was actually quite a phenomenal thing. It provided regular and sustained education between Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. And it also provided a unique opportunity to address social needs, but to address the social needs within the curriculum, so between PDMU and Learning for Life and Work at Key Stage 3. And lastly, the collaboration from our perspective has led to school improvement.
Okay. Tony, you mentioned that the term shared education is now being very widely used.
Yeah.
And perhaps we do need a very clear definition of what shared education is. Now, I know that you provided a definition, but do you believe that maybe needs to be refined? And have you had any conversations with the department in the lead up to them developing their policy paper on shared education?
Well, Joanne led the work on the centre in formulating the definition of the work there, and it partly reflects the international work that some of us have been involved in. Joanne maybe said a little bit about that. But if you think about the definition in the MAG, the Ministerial Advisory Group, I mean, I think we're quite comfortable with that. The key thing is that shared education is work that involves work between schools from different sectors, that's focused on a curriculum that's sustained and regular and tries to create these new habits of practice. The traditional sort of EMU type approach was one-off projects that brought people together for a while, did something and then they scattered again. There's some very worthy work that's been done in recent years that is like that on a more enhanced level, but unless it works to establish sustainable networks and collaborative networks between people, then it's very difficult to see how that can actually change the nature of practice within schools and within classrooms. And unless you change what's happening within and between schools, then there's no reason to imagine why anything else will change in relation to attitudes, school improvement and all the rest of it. John, do you want to say something about the definition? I just think it into the international.
Well, just to say that the centre is involved in some international activity. We have been working for the last 3 or 4 years in Macedonia, for example, to help them develop a model for shared education which is based on the Northern Ireland model. And we've been working with the Ministry of Education there and senior policy officials. I don't know how much you know about Macedonia, but they have a separate school system for ethnic Albanians and Macedonians that came out of their peace agreements. They'd formally integrated schools which have become separate. And the kids in the ethnic Albanian schools are educated in Albanian and in Macedonian, so there's a language issue as well. And the shared education model that's been developed there is looking at aspects of the curriculum wherein there is minimal verbal instruction, but the kids can actually come together. Sometimes these separate schools actually work within the same building, and the kids attend them on a shift basis.
Okay, and just in relation to conversations that you've had with the department in drafting policy, have you had those conversations?
Yeah, we're talking to members of the Inspectorate who are developing a framework for evaluating and assessing the impact of the programme, the Delivering Social Change programme that's likely to be sort of formally announced quite soon. We talk to officials from the department all the time. They talk to a lot of different people, and I think one of the things that we're impressed at is their willingness to talk to a wide range of voices and use that to try to inform and shape the initiative. I suppose what we're saying to them is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all model here. There isn't a fixed, rigid template. They need to give a degree of responsibility and autonomy to teachers to allow them to help shape things, and they've got to allow the programme to be adaptable, and the assessment frameworks, the evaluation frameworks to be adaptable as well, to recognise that we're dealing with problems for which there is no easy solution, and so part of the challenge for everyone involved is to work together to find new solutions, and that does mean having a certain degree of tolerance of failure, because you can learn from that. That's the only way you're going to create innovative solutions. So yeah, we've talked to them quite a lot, continue to talk to them, and are very impressed with the officials and inspector, their preparedness and their willingness to take on board the sort of evidence that Miles and Joanne and others are feeding into the system.
Thank you. Mr. Lumb.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's good to see you again. I'm afraid the technology has let me down once again, so I haven't actually read the full paper. I just had it at 10 o'clock. Clearly, you know, your shared education project is on a roll at the moment, and I couldn't deny that there's a lot of money to be thrown at it, and hopefully a lot of benefit to come out of it. So what I can't quite understand is the perception that's developing of hostility, or a level of hostility towards the integrated sector. And as I actually say it in your presentation, Joanne, can I just read you that wee bit? Research has shown that integrated education, while an effective mechanism for relationship building, has only limited appeal. That in itself flies in the face of every poll I've seen for the last 5 years. You go on to say the overwhelming majority of parents, where such schools, integrated schools, are an option, opting to send their children to separate schools. Again, that flies in the face of the expressed desire of parents who frequently say that if there was an integrated school available, they would either send their children to it or at least consider sending their children to it. So, why do you make a comment like that?
Well, although the surveys have been saying for many years, you know, around between 60 and 80% of parents are saying that they would favour integrated education, it's not reflected in their behaviour. You know, they're not, even in cases where it is an option, there are schools that are undersubscribed that are integrated schools.
Yeah, there's undersubscribed schools right across every sector and right across Northern Ireland. The integrated sector, and I don't want to deliberately phrase this this review in terms of shared and integrated. It was my idea, not shared versus. So don't be thinking I'm on a mission here of some kind, because I'm not. But when you've only got 62 schools out of 1,150, clearly there's going to be a lot of situations where there just isn't an integrated school available, and that's part of the problem. It's not because the parents who would like to send their children somewhere like that choose not to. They just can't. Geographical.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose where you would expect, where you have 80% of, you know, in a survey saying that they would send their children to an integrated school, you would expect that every integrated school would be bursting, and that's not the case. Now, that's not to say we have no hostility at all towards integrated education. Okay. In fact, a lot of our research evidence has endorsed integrated education as a way of promoting better relations between Protestants and Catholics. There's no question. I mean, maybe Miles wants to say something about that, but that's...
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that point. Various presentations that we've made, both in our articles, peer-reviewed journals and presentations here to teachers, we've always emphasised that actually we see integrated as what we're trying to match. There's so much good practice there that one is trying to achieve also, and you need to make sure that if you offer anything else as an alternative, you do at least as well as that. We're also always open to the idea that however carefully we have measured and however much research we've done already, there may be some measurement we haven't used yet, which might just show that there is this additional effectiveness of integrated schools. This is why we're doing the work now on social networks, because we thought that it was possible that the integrated education would actually be promoting these really mixed, integrated social networks of children. In other words, getting to some deeper level of integration that other schools were not yet reaching. So our eyes are very much open.
Can I maybe just add one thing, Trevor? I mean, because I understand that we've talked often about this apparent conundrum between the opinion poll evidence and the reality. And my sense of this is that when people are responding to an opinion poll, they're offering a preference in almost in an abstract sense. But because of having lots of conversations with lots of parents in lots of different situations, I think whenever parents are making a choice about a school for their child, it's no longer an abstract choice. They're making a choice between a number of very specific schools in their very specific area, and so the reputation of local schools becomes very, very important. And that's why in any particular area they may prefer, in an abstract sense, a particular type of school, but whenever they're choosing between 3 or 4 actual schools, there's one of those schools that in and of itself has a good reputation, and that's what they choose. And that's not always an integrated school. As Joanne said, just to reinforce the point in case it needs reinforced, I've always been a strong supporter of the integrated sector and worked with them, and I think the integrated schools by and large are great, but the problem is that it only, even the most optimistic target is for 10% of the school-age population. And we're concerned about the other 90% to try and ensure that everyone in the school system has the opportunity of a strong and positive an experience as possible.
Okay, well, you actually lead me on to my next question, but just before I get to that one, what do you think of NICE's statement last week? And if you think of the shared education programme in terms of sociological benefit, that their starting point is actually your end point. They're starting from where you'd like to be.
Well, not necessarily. I think we may have a range of views on this, but my own personal view is that we think the collaborative model provides an opportunity to work with schools and allow them to maximise the benefit to the young people in terms of cohesion, qualifications, standard experience, and all the rest of it. We think that many schools, once we talk to them about collaborative model, are very enthusiastic about it. Every school that we've worked with virtually has found it to be a very, very positive experience and like to run with it. And with only a limited level of support are prepared to do some amazing things. At some point in the future, schools may decide this is working so well, they just want to keep it like that. They may decide at some point in the future this is working so well, let's become an integrated school, but I don't want to prescribe any future for that. That's up to schools. From my point of view, we can do something now which they find valuable, and in future they can decide what's best for them going forward, but that's a matter for the schools. I don't want to say this is all about getting to a particular endpoint.
I mean, I think just to follow on from that, I mean, our position would be kind of theory-informed and evidence-based, and it's this idea that we know that sustained contact works in terms of changing attitudes and behaviours, and there are a range of opportunities within our education system to promote that, shared education being one of them. We're not, as Tony says, prescriptive in terms of where we see this ending up.
Okay. Just bear with me, Chairman, just on the figures, because you said, Tony, that the most optimistic projection for integrators would be about 10% of the school population. But in your paper, you say that officially designated integrated schools account for only 4% of overall provision. Well, that's not right.
The schools are 4% of the schools, not the number of pupils attending them.
Surely the figure you should be working on is the number of pupils, the percentage of the school population.
Well, that figure only applies to the schools in the report, and we checked it before we provided.
Well, I'm even quickly trying to work out what 62 is as a percentage of 1,150. I think you'll find it's more than 4%. It's getting more like 6%. But, you know, I mean, just the record, the correct figure in terms of school population and officially designated integrated schools would be just touching 7%, I think.
Pupils, yes.
Pupils, yeah. And, I mean, is your 10% schools or pupils, Tony?
Oh, no, well, it's IES target, 10% of pupils.
Pupils, yeah. But, I mean, if it's 7% at the moment, and that doesn't include the naturally integrated schools. We all know where they are and who they are, who are not officially designated, but actually are effectively very much shared schools, you know, with a healthy population which would easily qualify for integrated if they cared to apply for that status, but there's no need for them to. They don't need to. If you add those in, well, then you come towards the figure which we often quote about that 90% of our pupils are actually educated solely with their own co-religionists. And that means you've already got this 10%.
It's IES target, not mine.
Well, I know, but you quoted it. It's, you know, I always end up sounding hostile to what you're trying to do, and I'm not, honestly. I hope you will accept that.
I mean, Miles can actually talk about the schools that are mixed without necessarily being within the integrated framework.
Chairman, I really just wanted to make a point about the importance of studying integrated schools and comparing them with other kinds of schools, and that is because in in a situation in which you have choice, there's always a risk that you have self-selection effects, so that certain kinds of people choose to go to certain kinds of schools and they choose to avoid certain kinds of schools. So there's always the risk that you start from a lower baseline in an integrated school, because the kind of parents who choose to send their children to those kinds of schools may be the people whose attitudes we are less interested in changing. So, you know, taking nothing away from the good work that is done in integrated schools, they will always suffer from a self-selection bias that other schools won't.
I think
Sorry, I was just going to say in relation to the point about those mixed schools. So we've done some analysis of mixed schools. We've called those schools that have between 5 and 10% of children from the other religious group, and super mixed schools which have more than 10%. And our findings for those schools are that they're very effective outcomes in terms of contact. But I would be fairly confident that those schools would not want to transfer to integrated status. They are avowedly, particularly in the Catholic sector.
Not advocating that they do.
Okay, I thought you said.
That's perhaps the best form of integration, you know, the natural, based on demographics and geography and history. That's fine, but I can't help thinking, Chair, again, that, you know, if we're sitting here in 20 years' time, we'll be having much the same discussion, probably with a much greater input from the shared education movement, but we'll still have Catholic maintained, controlled, integrated Irish medium, hopefully all of which will have a fair degree of sharing involved, and that the integrated twice as big as what it does now.
Well, we would hope in 20 years' time we are in a situation where the taken for granted assumptions about the way schools work have changed, and schools no longer think they can do all the things they need for the pupils by themselves, but they work with other schools. Because I think that will be better for the schools, better for the young people, and the evidence suggests it will be better for local communities as well. And hopefully it will have helped to contribute to the development of a more cohesive and shared society.
Always interesting.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose really from a personal perspective, I went to a single-sex, probably a very much traditional single-identity school, and moved to what is now a super mixed school. I moved to Methody, and it was really for educational outcomes, and also the fact that there were boys, so that was probably the to be perfectly honest. But it did actually prepare me for life afterwards, and when I went to Queen's, that it wasn't just quite the shock that it would have been, and also then entering into the real world, as to whether this is the real world or not. But I mean, certainly there were positives there for me. But the whole idea of super mix, I think, is it's an interesting term. But I think it's probably quite apt. But I'm not sure that I would have considered it to be integrated. But yeah, we're moving on. Mr. Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I want to welcome you all here to the committee as well. I made a point of welcoming my own university earlier. There again, there was a bit of strain, sort of shared education in our household, because my wife went to Queen's and I went to the University of Ulster. So I don't think Eller University encouraged that, but it just happened naturally. That's natural sharing, Trevor. When we look at education right across Northern Ireland, there's quite an interesting thing I can see there. The controlled sector has examples basically of all types of schools from all sectors actually under that umbrella. Should we be using that as that sector as a bedrock for future sharing?
Well, we're in a situation where we have a range of different sectors and management types. I think that's unlikely to change radically into the near future. So if it doesn't change radically, the question is what can we do to try and enhance and improve the experience of young people in the schools. And that's where I think the collaborative model works, because you can have schools from different sectors working together. I think whenever CCMS were here, they were pointing to, I think it's 4 examples of maintained schools that have a mixed enrolment. There are some controlled schools, as you say. There's an Irish medium controlled school, there's controlled integrated schools, there's controlled schools that have a mix because of circumstance. So there is a variety of different types of schools. Rather than trying to find the single type that works, if we can get schools working together collaboratively in the way that we have done, then I think we can get a very quick win for everyone. And if that becomes, as the Chair was saying, becomes the mainstream experience of young people, then that's the sort of issue we can look at some point in the future and see if schools want to sort of change the structural arrangements in any way. But that will be a matter for schools and parents and teachers and whatever.
Yeah. And Tony, there's another thing which I can certainly see. When you look into the next 3 to 4 years and financially where all departments are going, the importance of sharing, not only across sectors. I don't think the sectors, to be honest with you, will be that terribly important. When you look at how rural some of our schools actually are and how isolated, physically isolated some of them are, and their inability to deliver a wide enough curriculum, do you see huge opportunities there for sharing of education, whether it's internally within sectors or actually more broadly across sectors, in the actual survival of those smaller units, which mean an awful lot to those local communities?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've been working with quite a number of primary schools, in particular small rural primary schools, that in and of themselves face real challenges in trying to deliver the curriculum. But when they work with their neighbours from another sector, often, then collectively they can do that. At this point, in those situations, very often the schools don't want to explore an integrated option at this point, maybe at some time in the future. So in that situation, collaboration and sharing is a way of them benefiting all of the kids and helping to secure that important social institution in a rural community and helping to keep the community together. So yeah, I think there are many places we know that that is a real viable option, and we hope that the leaders of the sectors and the department see that.
I mean, somewhere like Ballycastle is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
In terms of the broad range of curricular offer that they can offer together, but alone it's an entirely different picture.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Zovrand.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your presentation this morning. I think there's so much more sharing going on than we ever really realised, and as my time in this job has progressed, just you come to appreciate how small rural, as you said, small rural schools are gaining from sharing the expertise, and even larger primary schools in my area. It's about sharing that expertise across that divide and gaining the expertise in an area. There's more integrated or more sharing than previously expected. Integrated with a small I should say. But I mean, you've said in your report that there's some groups less inclined to be involved in sharing than others, and what groups are these, and would they be defined by socioeconomic rather than ethno-religious factors?
I'm not sure that we said there were groups less inclined to be involved in sharing. I think that what we were saying was that the outcomes are different for different groups depending on contextual variables. So, for example, I mean, some of our quantitative research has shown that in areas that are very divided, like North Belfast, there are some positive outcomes of sharing, but they're maybe not as extensive as they might be for schools in the likes of Limavady or Ballycastle or some more mixed environments. So I think it was to do with the outcomes in relation to context.
Another point on that is that we have schools at different levels of sharing. They're engaged with each other in entirely different ways, and so it's entirely contextual. In some regards, we have schools who would be described as kind of organic partnerships or emerging partnerships that are at the very early stages. We also have partnerships across Northern Ireland that are heading towards some sort of symbiotic or almost an interdependent relationship with one another, like Ballycastle, for example. Mm-hmm. So there is a range, there is a spectrum of the way in which schools engage with one another.
Yeah. And I think that's, it goes back to your original question, which was, I thought, interesting, the definition of shared education and how it needs to encompass the wide variety, and that's not a negative, it's a positive. Yeah. That we should encourage whatever level of sharing and congratulate them on that, and that it's a work in progress, that changes over time. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Lunn.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to move away from a normal tack here. In terms of the acknowledged gap between what is produced by the best of our schools and the deficit at the bottom end of the results, What potential do you think there is in sharing programmes for cooperation between the best of our grammar schools and another school half a mile down the road, which is producing the figure of 25%, not even achieving 5 GCSEs? Because I get the impression, I'm sure I've heard it from at least one representative of the grammar sector, that they're not that much interested in this. I mean, what's your experience of this so far? Because they should be able to give a helping hand, surely, to improve the overall situation.
I think Joanne's already mentioned that some of the survey evidence suggests that there is a bit of a tension between the possibilities of grammar and secondary schools working collaboratively. I suspect that's more related to a broader policy context and people wanting to maintain demarcation lines and clarity, which is unfortunate, but I suspect that's the explanation. I think there's no doubt, if you look at experience in England, where federations and collaboration has been on the agenda for quite a long time, it's largely focused around the issue of school improvement and strong schools supporting weaker schools to try and improve their practice. We've had even things about this week in the news around private schools. The public schools working with local authority schools as part of that sort of process. There's plenty of evidence in many different places that's one particular context, but even schools working together and teachers sharing a wider repertoire of experience and expertise is a way of helping teachers to change their own classroom practice, because that's what you need to happen for school improvement to happen. So collaboration does that. It gives teachers this sustained regular network of expertise that they can dip into, and that's always going to help. So I think you're absolutely right. There is the potential in an environment where there are fewer concerns, maybe around sort of undesirable change, where schools can work in those sort of contexts, could work together, share practice, share expertise, share experience, broaden the repertoire of classroom skills that teachers are working with, and improve things for everyone. I don't know, Miles, you want to?
I would have just made the point there that some of our other work in other contexts, and this is a particular large-scale European study involving the UK, Germany, the Netherlands and Sweden, one of the things that we're finding there is the positive benefits of mixing for these are ethnic minority immigrant children who are integrated into friendship networks with majority group children. So I think if you can get the schools to collaborate at the right level, I think you can actually use this program as a first step towards increasing, first of all, the educational aspirations of other children, and then the educational performance. And that's something that we intend to provide at the end of our study. Our study will be a 5-year longitudinal study, and at the appropriate point, we'll actually be able to plug in the school grades and the GCSE scores of children to be able to see some of the hard outcomes of some of this mixing that we're involved in.
Trevor, just on that point, as a practical example, we have schools across Northern Ireland that are involved in partnership, where you may have a school and this is an example without identifying the schools, where a school has been struggling and the inspectorate has deemed a certain department within the school to be inadequate. And as a result of the collaboration between a maintained school and a controlled school at a post-primary level, the maintained school, with its expertise in science, has been able to help another school pull its kind of grade from inadequate up to outstanding.
Is that a maintained grammar school?
They're not grammar schools, so I'm leaving aside school type, and more talking about where we mentioned that idea of strong, weak. But what's really important is not so much that there's a sharing of expertise from one school to another that has the experience, but when our schools come together, they often look for common and complementary need. So common need are the types of needs that both schools need, and complementary need is the idea of identifying where each school has skills. So the idea of strong weak is reasonably crude, in the sense that when we talked about the school that was struggling, that school also had an expertise in special needs and was able to help the other school in return. So that's the type of relationship that we're essentially talking about.
I can't help thinking, Chairman, that the grammar schools could do a lot to help their image. I mean, they seem determined to cling to a system where they put children through these tests, which some of us despise, and the failures have to go to some other school, but they could at least improve their image by trying to assist those schools. If they're not prepared to accept the children, they could at least give them a helping hand, But anyway, that's my rant for today.
Use the F word.
Hold on.
Second rant.
Mr. McCausland.
Apologies, I have
an appointment. I couldn't get out of it this morning. But I just wanted to ask, in view of all the research and studies that you've done in terms of sharing and children coming together from different backgrounds and traditions, if children come together from a school in the Catholic maintained sector and the controlled sector, they're probably coming from different cultural traditions. Those who are coming from the maintained sector will be coming from a school, particularly at the secondary level, where they probably play Gaelic games, may well have Irish language in the curriculum. We'll have probably a traditional music group in the school, Irish traditional music. So there's a strong cultural identity there. May well not be the same in the control school. Do you see any issues arising from that?
Well, my experience is, particularly in rural schools, that in control schools there's often a very strong tradition of music, particularly centred around bands, pipe bands and such things. And a lot of pupils within the schools, I mean, I've been in schools where the kids are practicing playing bagpipes, for example. I suspect you're right to the extent that there's probably a clearer, more tightly defined cultural framework within maintained schools, but that hasn't been a problem in our experience. What's tended to happen is that the opportunity in situations where people have addressed cultural issues specifically, people have used that as an opportunity just to broaden the experience that people have. I mean, we have had situations where there's been discussions around remembrance, for example, in November, and broadening the experience of children from Catholic schools who traditionally maybe wouldn't have been as connected into that, and addressing some of these sorts of issues, aspects of sort of history and citizenship. Different schools choose to use the opportunity of collaboration in different ways. They focus on different areas of the curriculum. Some of them are more directly related to some of these issues than others. And that's okay, because the important thing is you bring people together in as many different ways as possible, and then as Miles was saying earlier and John's work demonstrates, once you've created that context, that provides an opportunity where you can start to address issues around difference, and you've built up a level of trust that you can start to deal with some of those more challenging issues, and that's when you start to get the evidence suggests you start to get significant change and improvement in the cohesive nature of our society.
Would you not accept, though, that remembrance, while it's hugely important, is not the counterpart of the others?
Sure.
And that certainly others I've spoken to of their experience of control schools would have not as fulsome a view of the extent of the musical traditions and other traditions. I remember some years ago someone at CCEA saying to me that when they were organising an event, it was very easy to go to a Catholic maintained school to get a traditional music group. And I think there was a school up around Castlederg somewhere had a pipe band.
Right.
There used to be a pipe band in Campbell, I think, but you know, apart from the sort of developmental work that's been done by the Ulster Scots Agency recently in terms of putting music into schools, I don't know of any other schools, barring one, that has a band.
Yeah. Oh no, the school I was in didn't have a band, but there were some of the pupils in the school who played in bands, and so you practiced or allowed to practice in the school.
My point being, though, that if a culture is excluded from schools, it is denied the validity of being part of the education system.
Well, is that making an assumption that there is specific exclusion? I don't know that there is. Maybe there is. I don't know. I'm not aware that there is.
Well, if the thing is not there, it's been either intentionally or unintentionally excluded.
Well, it may be that there are other spaces that are available for it. No, it's
just not pursue the point. Just make the observation. Sure. For any cultural or linguistic expression right across the whole of Europe, when you look at examples internationally, the two key things are to be part of the education system, gives you validity, and you get intergenerational passing on, and also part of the media.
In our first wave of shared education schools, there was one a maintained secondary school in a rural context that developed a lot of activity with the network of primary schools, controlled maintained primary schools in its area. And one of the unexpected benefits of that was not just for the experience of the kids, but they started connecting up to all sorts of community organisations, and the maintained school started to be used as a community resource for events and meetings and other activities, including on at least one occasion an event with the Orange Order, where they carried out something in the maintained school because they had a good hall. So I'm a little bit vague because I'm not sure, we haven't come across this as a particular issue, but that's just an example where the connections that are created across communities because of the collaborative relationship between schools does have a community impact and helps to provide opportunities for people within communities to come together in ways that previously just wouldn't have happened at all.
No, I've no objection to any of those things. That's good. The fact that even you say you haven't come across it as an issue,
sure.
I think it's an issue which has been left in the too difficult drawer almost,
right,
or forgotten about. I mean, make the point that children going into a school have a basic human right to learn about the culture and the cultural expressions of the community from which they come, which in many cases would be, as you say, the children playing a band outside, but it doesn't get brought into the school, and that almost delegitimises, marginalises it, which I think is something that, in terms of creating a shared future and better relationships, would be a good thing to actually.
Nelson, as a practical example, and I'm not exactly sure if this is the type of thing you want information on, but in our partnerships, and again I'll go back to the partnership in Derry Londonderry, in terms of culture, in terms of arts, the children have a shared choir that operates both inside and outside of the school. They've engaged in quite a large drama piece involving 150 children, involving 9 schools across the city. And that's, again, both an expression of activity that happens inside the school and outside the school. We have evidences of shared sports in terms of rugby, Gaelic. The type of research I do tends to be very focused on small groups of young people or on classroom observations. I'm involved in observations where young people talk about their kind of collective identities, common identities. They're talking about their accents, they're talking about language, gender. So it's more than a conversation around culture. It's actually quite a broad and nuanced.
If they're talking about their cultural identities, what I'm suggesting is that in some cases one group of children may be coming forward with a cultural identity that they bring from the home into the school, but which is then reaffirmed and validated in the school. And the other children may be coming from a community identity, that cultural identity that they live in and have outside the school, but it's almost left outside the school gates. That's the point. So therefore you're not getting a level playing field. And I just think that there's potentially there's 2 dimensions to it. There's the rights issue and then the relationship issue as well.
I mean, I wonder I've actually written a paper on this issue, and it's I think the
Great.
Because they maintain.
Give me the title now and give me the details. So I
He disagrees with everything you said.
But the maintained sector, is the Catholic sector, and there's a strong attachment to kind of cultural traditions and so on within it. I think the controlled sector, because it's open to everyone, and presented in that way, it's difficult then to attach to particular traditions or culture.
Only if you approach it on a school basis rather than a child-centred basis. Once you approach it on a child-centred basis and looking at it in terms of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the commitments in there that a child has the right to learn about the culture of the community and the home from which they come, and it's to be done on the basis of equity that doesn't discriminate between children and children, so that what happens to children in one educational sector should also be available to those in another sector. On that basis, children, it's an important issue, it's a rights issue. And also, I think you get a better relationship if children come together. But if you could give me the details of the paper, I'd be delighted to read it.
I'll send it to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was worth coming this morning.
Nelson's happy. Just very finally, I just want to know whether you've done any research around youth service.
Around
youth service?
The youth service. You mean outside of school, with a particular kind of focus? I'm not quite sure what you're getting at.
I suppose it's really, I mean, there are opportunities with youth clubs and so on as well for sharing. And I was just wondering whether there had been any research around the level of engagement and sharing in communities.
The closest we have come to it, potentially the contested spaces work in Derry Londonderry, one of the key things there wasn't just collaboration between schools, but collaboration with statutory and non-statutory agencies. But we have a focus on the particular use sector hasn't been at this point a focus of the work certainly I've been involved in.
There's other projects within the school that are looking at this. There's the Iliad project, which is investigating links in education and disadvantage, and that's one of the aspects of that project. Now the research is ongoing. It's due to report to OFM DFM in March, I think.
You know, I just think it'd be quite interesting because obviously there's a focus on schools, and obviously once the young people leave school or go out of school at 3:30, you know, what level of engagement is there then after that? And you might find that in some areas it's very high, and there are probably some very good models, and in others maybe it could be encouraged.
There's a very, very long tradition of work within the youth sector, a different type of pedagogy, often evidence of a greater commitment to addressing issues around reconciliation and cohesion, and more the use of more creative methodologies in addressing these sorts of issues. Although one of the things that was always identified as important there was the voluntarist nature of it, so that sometimes it could work a little bit better than in schools because young people had the choice of going to those settings or not, whereas in schools it was effectively compulsory. There were attempts at various points and University of Ulster did some interesting work in this where they trained youth workers and teachers together just to try and get some synergies between them, and I think that was successful to a degree, but because they are two different professions there remains some degree of professional sort of tension between them, and I guess that still is the case.
But I think it goes back to that point as well about, you know, how difficult it is for our teachers, or the expectation that we have of them to address some of these controversial issues within the context of the classroom, given that they don't receive training for it and that they're currently educated in separate teacher training colleges. You know, to assume that they will have the capacity to do this or the will to do it, you know, is something that we certainly need to think about.
If I could just add to that, members of your committee may or may not be aware of work on the National Citizenship Scheme in England. It's an idea that David Cameron is very keen on, and I'm not recommending it for that reason. But it is a great idea for bringing together people from different backgrounds, and these are not just ethnic and racial backgrounds, but also deliberately different socio-economic backgrounds. And they get young people from school who volunteer to take part in these activities outside of schools. They take part in a 4-week program that involves, it starts off with some outward bound activities, then they go and get some real world experience of, for example, how to market a product. They get people from business involved, something aimed at helping them find employment at the end. They also do some community charity work, and they do this in a team of 12, and they get to know each other. Depending on their team, they get to know people from a particular subset of other groups, and we're actually in the middle of an evaluation of that work at the moment. So I say that to give you faith in the idea that nobody's recommending, I think, that the people of Northern Ireland take this brave step on their own as if there were no evidence ahead of them. There are lots and lots of other examples. People mentioned collaborations also. We also have collaborations in South Africa. We've done similar work in Malaysia and many other countries. And the evidence is there's a huge evidence basis that if you bring people together and you create the conditions of positive contact, the outcomes are going to be positive.
Sure. While this isn't specifically about the youth service, we have some evidence as well of how schools can engage more broadly in the community and build stronger links to voluntary and statutory agencies. Some of the partnerships that I've worked with have made links with youth clubs, for example, where people will use youth clubs in each other's communities. We've evidence of where City Council become involved with schools, stronger links with the PSNI, for example, voluntary agencies like CEOP, other educational groups, community wardens, churches, and historical kind of sites and settings. So there is almost a community development element built into some partnerships.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lunn would like to come back for a very short question.
I just wanted to go back to Nelson's point about the cultural expression in various types of school, and particularly where he started off was really on the musical side of it. You would know I have a musical interest, and I also go to a lot of schools, and I always ask them what's the extent of music and interest in the school. And without exception, nowadays, and it gladdens my heart, there has been a resurgence of the teaching of music and the teaching of instruments, and the school has a band or a traditional music group or whatever. But right across the board, and I can't help thinking that it's a good area where there's real scope for collaboration, particularly, you know, because music teachers sometimes are contracted in rather than being permanently employed. So they can teach more than one school at a time, and this is really good stuff. But I don't want to cross swords with Nelson to the exclusion. But really, you can't have it both ways. You can't say that a control school is for everyone, and it's almost the equivalent of an integrated school. So why do we need an integrated school?
British Army cadets
and yet have a Protestant ethos to it? I think that, you know, maybe it comes down to instruments. Nelson, you want them to be taught the flute and the side drum, whereas they're actually being taught orchestral instruments and proper music.
I find in many orchestras they do actually have drums and flutes.
Yeah.
They are musical instruments. But I wasn't going to come back, but I am now. And I'm grateful.
Of course, through the chair.
I'm grateful to Mr. Lunn for opening the door. Sure, you'll be generous, Chair, and the point. One of the best examples of good sharing I came across was at the point where they were having fife and drum classes in the boys' model school, and they were able to bring their fife and drum group together with the traditional music group from Barnegia and perform separately and then certain tunes together. But they could only do that because there happened to be a group of a particular tradition in each of the schools to come together. If you have only one group, it doesn't work. And that's the issue. And the point that Trevor was raising there about control schools, if it is child-focused, the cultural mix and cultural provision and accommodation within a school in one area, depending on the community that it serves, will be different from a control school in another area. It will depend entirely on the community that it serves. But the children going into the school bring the right with them. It's not something they leave at the door. It's a human right.
Yeah, and the boys' model and Barnegie and Ashfield boys were also involved in the Belfast Cuchulains, where they played hurling and shinty with Scottish shinty teams. So sport, you know, was used in interesting ways there as well.
Okay, I'm going to move now.
I thought the music one was actually a better expression of cultural sharing in that. I haven't seen too many shinty teams around the Shankill recently.
Yeah, well, we had some interesting games in Scotland with the shinty
yes,
teams.
Yes, could stay there.
I'm going to move now to Mr. Kinnan for the last question.
Thank you, and sorry not to be here for half of it, but I just wondered, had you considered a sort of matrix or a step-by-step sort of continuum of from no sharing to sharing or totally integrated, and having sets of examples that everyone can follow, so that you're pushing it all, knowing that everyone's at different points?
Yeah. There's a continuum, which the inspectors have picked up on and are using as part of the framework that they're organising. I think one of the things we're saying to the inspectorate is that a continuum is useful because it gives you sort of a guideline as to where people might be at different stages. But don't assume everyone moves at the same speed, and don't assume it's a simple linear model. You can't do step 3 unless you've done step 2, because our experience is that it's a much more organic thing than that. But yeah, the inspectors are using that as part of their framework, which I think is very useful.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I thank you for your time this morning and your presentation, and obviously if there's other information that you'd like to send to us, we'd be very willing to accept it.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Space.
Well, I think think we've heard from Queen's that they have been working with the department, but I suppose it'd be interesting if we, just in the same letter to DE, that we just find out the extent to which they're working with the Shared Education Centre. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Moving then to correspondence, just refer you to pages 105 to 219. We have 15 items provided under correspondence and one tabled item. There are a couple which I'll highlight, and if members have any other issues they want to raise just coming out of correspondence. We have a report on early intervention in children's services at page 166, and it has some interesting information around early years. So if members are content that we forward that to DE, just to ask them to just to reflect on the findings, particularly in respect of early years, if members are content that we do that. And the DE employability skills and connectedness between schools and businesses, that's at page 208. We do have a visit arranged for W5 in January 2015. Would members be content that we maybe speak to Momentum and ask them to come and brief us at that? Obviously we'd had discussions with them I think before, and they had offered or sort of indicated a willingness to come to committee, but I know that they have another piece of work. Is it this week or next week they're doing another?
Tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. Tomorrow they have another conference, so it might be interesting for them just to come up and to share their findings, particularly over the last year, because I believe at last year's conference a number of commitments were made by a variety of departments, so including DE, so it will be quite interesting just to see how whether or not those have come to pass.
Very much so.
And also then we have the tabled invitation from the Chair of CBI to attend the official launch of Step Change, which is a new approach for schools in Northern Ireland, and it's on Tuesday the 16th of December at the Hilton Hotel. So it's a breakfast event, or as opposed to an evening event. Okay.
I'd like to go to that.
Yeah, I think I thought for some reason that it may have been in the evening, so I should be able to go to that as well. If other members would like to attend, if they can indicate to the committee clerk, it would be useful. Okay, any members have any other concerns or issues they'd like to raise? No? So if you're content then that we deal with the correspondences as indicated on the cover page. Okay, thank you very much. Draft forward work programme has been tabled at pages 221 to 224. We have agreed an informal visit to the nurture units at Edenbrook and St Patrick's Primary Schools on Tuesday coming, the 2nd of December. Members will leave here at 12:30 and return at around 2:33 o'clock. So if you could indicate as soon as possible to committee staff that you plan to attend that, just to arrange transport for the school to go to the school. So we appreciate you doing that today. Let's see. The next is in relation to Momentum. Also, just to remind you that next week's meeting will be at 9:30 in the Senate chamber. We'll be discussing budget, and then from there, then we'll be going to the Stormont Hotel, where we have NICE's Integrated Schools Parliament, and that's commencing at 11:30. So members are content that they're happy with the forward work programme. Okay, and any changes? Okay, that's great. So the next meeting is next Wednesday the 3rd of December at 9:30 in this room. So if members are content, we shall adjourn. Thank you.
Members, very good. A bit warmer today.